Hi, my name is Jason Anderson, and this is my wife Anna, and we are with Water's Edge Specialty Pruning and Plant Health Care, and I'm going to let Anna introduce our company.
Okay. Well, we call ourselves Water's Edge Specialty Pruning because, and Plant Health Care, because we do use hand tools in our pruning most all the time, except with the exceptions of when we have to use hedge trimmers or hedge pruners when the plant material may be in a cylindrical shape. But otherwise, we use all hand tools, and we will go over some of the tools that we use by hand here a little bit later and demonstrate that for you. But our company also offers plant health care, so we do soil implementations, fertilizations done where it's directly put into the ground, so there's no topical applications and it's injected directly into the ground. We also do plant health care as far as disease and pest management, so we can help your plants achieve the best that they can possibly be. In our pruning, which we'll demonstrate to you, we are in a dormant state right now, so we're in the colder season, and this is the time of the year where a lot of the plant material can be pruned, with the exception of some of our spring bloomers, but we can go over that with you as well and tell you when you should plant or when you should prune certain species of plant material. Because we don't want to cut the blooms off of our azaleas or our gardenias right now, because we want those beautiful flowers in the spring and in the summer.
So just to expand on that, a brief background. I've been fortunate to be in the tree and shrub care industry in the Richmond area for about 30 years now. I started with a national firm, worked for them for about 15 years, and then the past 10 years I've worked with a business partner to grow a tree and shrub care business here in the Richmond area. But Anna and I, we both went to Virginia Tech with degrees in forestry and horticulture, and we've always had a dream of doing something on our own. So we've been very blessed that we've reached a point in our career to where I was able to sell my portion of the business to my younger business partner, and we started Water's Edge roughly about 6 months ago. So it's a real joy for us to work together, involve our family in it, work with a relatively small number of clients. Our areas of service are around Lake Anna. We live in Louisa, and also in the Northern Neck. We have a home in Reedville, so we're really focusing on those two areas, the Lake Anna and Northern Neck region. So again, been very fortunate to start this business. It's been a lot of fun so far, and with our backgrounds, it's been a joy. Okay, so we wanted just to give a brief rundown on the common tools that we use on our job sites when we're pruning. Especially right now, we're heavily pruning in the winter, but we will do some in the summer as well when we're not doing our plant health care treatments. Most common, the tool that we all have in our pockets when we're on the job site is a pair of hand pruners. These are Felcos. These are the professional hand pruners, but if you are a gardener and you like to get out and do stuff on your own, I would really advise you buying a nice pair of bypass hand pruners. The blade bypasses like a pair of scissors. It's not an anvil pruner where it smashes down, which does damage to plant tissue. You want a pair of bypass pruners, and these are Felcos with a nice little case. And again, you can do a whole lot with these. We have the loppers bay. One thing that we see, and I've done very guilty of, is taking those hand pruners and just trying to cut a branch that's too big. You feel like I can get it, and you're squeezing, and before you know it, you've damaged the branch, or you've injured your wrist, or whatever. If you're feeling that way, or like you need a bigger tool, then just use a pair of loppers. Again, you can get these. I think we got these at Lowe's, so they're relatively easy to get. But again, a bypass cut and a pair of or a type of tool that you'll use quite often if you're pruning in your landscape. So again, don't work those hand pruners too hard. Go to the next tool, next size tool in your toolbox. Another tool that we use quite a bit when we're doing pruning typically of younger trees is simply a pruning handsaw, not a handsaw like you'd use in a wood shop, but a pruning handsaw. This is a professional version, but you don't need an expensive one like this. Just buy one. that typically if you buy them at the garden center or the hardware store, they fold up. So that's a good one to have in your toolbox when you're pruning. But this allows you to cut maybe even a little bit bigger. Say you're pruning a Crepe Myrtle or you're pruning a low branch on a dogwood. It gives you the ability to take a bigger, maybe dead branch out of that tree. Very sharp though. Be very careful with this because they will cut you. All right. Lay that down. Another tool, we don't climb in our business. We will get on a ladder, an orchard ladder every now and again to reach a little bit higher, but we don't have the bucket trucks and the big equipment. We've been there and done that, and typically what we're using now is a pole tool like this. Again, this is a professional version, but you can buy these at your local garden center. A lot of them have a blade and a pole clip on them. This one we have set up with the clip. So we'll show you a little bit later, but when you pull down on it, it clips, so it allows you to reach up, maybe 10 foot above ground safely where your feet are still planted on the ground. And similar to the handsaw that I showed you just a minute ago, we have a setup here where we have a pole saw. So there's a blade on the end of this device too, so you can saw from the ground. One thing with these pole tools to be very aware of is you always want to reach higher to get that next branch. But be very careful, and it sounds very silly, but be very careful that you're not standing under the branch that you're cutting, because I've done it, and gravity's going to bring that branch down. So it's easy to do. You think you want to get that next one, but if it's up that high, just let it be. So these are the tools that we use on a regular basis, and really not that often are we bringing out much more than what you've just seen.
Everybody. Here we have a very popular plant, Buddleia, which is also known as the butterfly bush. The homeowner recently put these in the ground and planted them within about a year. So we're not going to reduce the size of these at all because they do want them to get bigger. But what we can do with these is deadhead them, as well as we can look to see if there's any crossing branches, any dead limbs or stems that are on it. Those can be removed as well. So one of the things with this plant being such a young plant, we can very easily use our Felco hand pruners for this. Sometimes butterfly bushes, of course there's many different varieties. Some of them are the low growing type that are out now, but there's some that get quite large and can get very woody, very thick stems. And if you're trying to reduce those, you may need your loppers in order to take big cuts off of those and thinning them. Now what we're going to be doing now is deadheading it. So basically what you want to do is take the spent bloom and go back to where you have new growth coming out of blooms. What you're going to want to do is take your hand pruners, your Felco pruners, and basically go back to where you see the next growth and trim just above that new growth area. Keeping in mind that if you want to shape it, you can shape it back if you want, but always remember to take it back to where that new growth comes out, because that will encourage more growth in the springtime. The other thing you want to look for is any kind of dead branches, which I don't really see any dead branches here, but you also want to look for cross-membering branches as well. Anything that's going to rub or touch, you want to get those out as well. So take, for instance, we have one down here, and you want all of your growth to kind of go out. You don't want it to grow into each other. So take, for instance, we have one right here that's kind of crossing the other down here at the bottom. So what I would do is I would take that cut all the way back to the main stem, and just remove that. So that way it's going to encourage that outward growth rather than the inward growth where it's going to start crossing each other.
Okay, so what we have behind us here is a Ligustrum that's grown up to probably about 10 foot tall at the top, and it's forming a nice hedge and a barrier. The screening here on a patio that I'm standing on, so it serves a very good purpose. It's a very versatile plant. You know, it can get out of hand if you let it get out of hand. There's no question about it. So it does require pruning, and we typically like to prune these in the winter months. Now, that's not to say if you have a branch that's errant or growing in your way in the summertime, take a pair of hand pruners and prune it out of the way, and everything will be fine. This is a good, you can see I'm holding the pole clip here, as we call it. This is a good example of a plant that I would not want to shear with a pair of mechanical shears or, you know, the hand shears. This plant lends itself much better to doing it by hand, basically, with a pole clip with hand pruners from which you can reach it from the ground, and so on. And Anna mentioned in the intro about shearing. Again, it's times when you can do that, and it's fine on things like Nellie Stevens hollies or things that tend to grow, as she said, in a conical form. But in this case, we're going to talk about doing a little bit of height reduction on some of the errant branches with this pole clip here. So basically, I'm going to reach up and just make a cut, and I'll go ahead and make the cut and then explain it. So we make the cut, the branch will fall down. One nice thing about the pole clip too, if you can't reach it, you can reach up and pull it down with the clip itself to be able to get to it. But as we're taught as pruners, you always want to prune just beyond the bud, the new growth, as Anna mentioned when she was talking about the Buddleia. So you want to prune above it. Now, when you're working with a tool like this, it's hard to be perfectly exact in your pruning cut, and that's okay, especially on a plant like a Ligustrum here that, you know, that can tolerate this type of pruning and will continue to grow. So the key with this is where you can't reach from the ground. You can very easily reach up. You're safely planted on the ground. You grab it, you try to make the best cut you can, and you pull it and it will fall down. Then you just kind of work your way around, and basically what you're doing is naturally shaping the plant as opposed to using a pair of shears. And again, on a big leaf plant like this, I would not recommend doing that. Other things with this plant is you want to watch the amount of interior thinning that you do, because if you open it up too much, you're going to lose the benefit of the screening of this plant, which typically it's planted for. So very versatile plant, relatively easy plant to prune, and a plant that will serve you well in your landscape.
Hi everybody. So here we have a Mahoney Abelia. It's a beautiful evergreen plant that will have blooms this time of the year towards the end of January, first part of February. And the blooms are very fragrant. If we ever have warm days, you'll see the bees just loving it. But as far as I want to talk about the pruning of Mahonias as well as gardenias, that you want to wait for those to finish blooming before we prune, because if we prune before the bloom, then we're actually going to cut that bloom off and not have the benefit of the beautiful flower of the plant. So keep that in mind, and when you get ready to prune anything like a Mahonia. So if we wanted to shape these up, what we would do is wait till after the bloom, and you would just want to come down to where a branch or a node is coming out and prune just above that to help promote that new growth is what you'll do. These are very, they thrive well. They actually will naturalize. You'll see, seedlings come up. So they will take a harsh pruning and come back from that. So if you've got one that's just kind of overbearing, that's gotten kind of wild on you, They will take a hard pruning, but just make sure that you do it at the right time of the year if you want to enjoy these beautiful and fragrant blooms.
Okay, so I have an azalea in front of me here. This happens to be a variegated azalea. But we talked about not pruning plants that bloom in the spring until after they bloom, and that's very true. That's what you want to do. But I think a common misconception about plants such as azalea, rhododendron, things of that sort, is that you cannot prune them in the winter. But that is not true. You can certainly prune them in the winter, but your pruning method and your focus is completely different than it would be in the springtime when most people want to reduce the size of azaleas. So again, wintertime you don't want to do the size reduction, but we've talked a little bit about thinning today, especially on larger, older azaleas. It really benefits them to go down low, take out some of the old canes, some of the dead wood, things of that sort. So if you are going into or you're looking at pruning your more mature azaleas, you certainly can do it in the winter. Again, so you would come down into the base of this plant and you would look for stems that are maybe not healthy, stems you really don't want to be there anyway, and you would prune those out. This plant is in pretty good shape, so we're not going to do a whole lot to it, but anything that, again, is rubbing, crossing, old canes that are just not producing like they should, and you want to let the new growth come through, you can certainly thin your azaleas, rhododendrons, and such in the winter months. And it's really a good time to do it, because if you think about it, those branches that you're taking out, you don't want them to be there anyway. So it can be done at that time of year. But going back to size reduction, if you want to enjoy the blooms, then you do want to prune them after the blooms have fallen off. But in this plant, there are a few. I can see some branches in here that are rubbing, crossing, that just need to go anyway. We're not really going to appreciate them for their blooms. So again, more so on your older plants. Here's a dead stem. You know, you can get there in the winter and do that. On the younger plants, typically not going to be quite as much to prune from the interior. You can see that's a dead stem there. But just looking through them and seeing what they look like, and not everybody wants to be out here in 38-degree weather, but you know, it's a good time of year to get out here and do it when the plant is somewhat dormant. And you can see through here there are some branches that are rubbing and crossing. So prune them in the late spring if you want to reduce their size, but you can certainly thin them during the winter months.
Okay, so here we have a hydrangea. Again, if we want to reduce the size a little bit, then what we're going to do is we're going to take a cut right above where the new bud is coming out. So we want to kind of, in shaping a plant, you don't want to stay in one position either. You want to be able to get up, walk around, all around if you can, to get an overall picture of what the plant looks like. Before you take a cut, make sure you do that, because you may be making an unnecessary cut from this angle, whereas if you looked over here, it may look different. So with the hydrangea, this is a great time of the year, here the end of January towards the first part of February, to start pruning a hydrangea. So basically what we're looking for is, again, any dead stems. We want to remove them. Hydrangeas are really known to die back and have some older stems in the base of it. So make sure you get some good gloves on your hands, because they can tear your hands up. But get down in there, kind of pull the leaves away, and see if it's anything that's down in here that might be dead that you could just pull out. Like this one just came on out on its own. It has no new wood, no new growth on it, and you want to be able to remove that, because removing it is going to help the plant with blooming as well, and putting out that new growth as well. A lot of times with the hydrangeas, they'll put out a lot of new growth from the base of it, as well as from the stem too. But by pruning it, it encourages better blooming as well, and you'll enjoy that all spring and summer long.
Okay, so what we have here in front of us is a variety of Japanese holly, very common plant in our Richmond or our Central Virginia area. It looks very similar to a boxwood, and we'll talk about a few boxwood things once we're done talking about this Japanese holly. This is a plant that you will see sheared oftentimes, and if it's been sheared, you can work it back into a natural look, but a lot of cases the best thing to do maybe is just to try to keep it shaped and then maybe thin it out. But this one is a natural specimen, so it's pretty neat. It's been cut back before with probably hand pruners and loppers. But if you wanted to, say, reduce the size of this plant, you are limited by the amount of green growth. And what I mean by that is if you get a foot or two into the plant, similar to what a boxwood would be, you're into bare stems. So you're kind of working with this outer maybe 18 inches to 2 feet. But it's very simple just to come through here and to prune out some of the height of the plant, and you kind of work your way around and just get a feel for it. And when you're done, a lot more pruning that we could do on this, but when you're done you still have that natural appearance rather. You don't have that sheared or shaped appearance. Another plant that lends itself very well to this type of pruning with hand pruners and shaping is a laurel, like an autoleucon laurel. A lot of those in our landscapes around the area. So use the hand pruners on these Japanese hollies, the laurels, things of that sort, as opposed to shearing. They look so much nicer when you have that finished product. Now to jump on to the boxwoods real quick, if you're not familiar with boxwood blight, go online, look at some university studies and kind of familiarize yourself with boxwood blight, because you need to be able to identify that before you go pruning. If you're pruning at your house and then you go to your friend's house to prune and your plants have boxwood blight, it's a good chance you could transfer it to the neighbors. But with boxwoods, one thing we really don't want to do is shear them. Especially the old English style boxwoods and even Americans and some of the newer varieties. But basically what we do with those is we thin them. So if this were a boxwood, and a thicker growth boxwood, again, all your growth's kind of going to be on the outside. The interior is going to be more bare and more stems, but we poke holes. We do what they call boxwood plucking. So we go in and we cut out little holes here and there around the boxwood to basically thin it. And the key is we want sunlight to get into the interior of that boxwood to encourage interior growth. When you have all your growth on the outside like this, if this were a boxwood, if you get ice, snow, anything heavy like that, it's going to push the boxwood down and potentially break it. And anybody that's seen English boxwoods with snow on them knows what I'm talking about. So that thinning to allow light into the plant is one of the best things you can do when we're talking about boxwoods. So we're in front of a crepe myrtle. I feel like that old picture with the guy with the pitchfork, right? The old farmer. And Anna says I need to smile more, so I'll smile. That's your one smile for this video. So back to the crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtle is a very common plant in our area in South, and I know everybody knows what one is. And one of the most common things that we see, unfortunately, is crepe myrtles that have been improperly pruned or basically topped. Southern Living coined the phrase years ago, crepe murder, so we kind of affectionately use that. And that's when somebody comes in and just inadvertently reduces the height of a crepe myrtle and you get all these crazy sprouts that come back. So you want to try to avoid doing that. When we're thinning crepe myrtles, when we're pruning crepe myrtles, our focus mainly is the thinning of the plant. Anna mentioned earlier about branches that are growing into the interior of the tree that are rubbing and crossing. So that's, 75% of what we're taking out. The other 25% would be the dead branches that we encounter. So in this tree here, there are quite a few rubbing and crossing branches. This is when you're going to use above your head, when you're going to use your pole clip and your pole saw, as Anna is holding. So we just want to be very careful, again, that we're not cutting something that's going to fall on our head. But again, the focus, branches laying on top of one another. So what do? You pick the one that looks like it's the weakest and remove that one, leave the one that's the strongest. It's not always a science, sometimes it's an art. You have to use your best judgment. This tree has some sprouts, or these may be suckers coming up from the base. A sucker actually comes out of the ground, typically off of a root, where sprouts grow within the interior canopy of the tree. So the sucker and a sprout, there is a difference between the two. But in this case, there is a branch right above my head here that is growing back into the interior of the canopy that I'm going to cut with our pole saw. Okay, so I'm getting ready to make the cut. I inadvertently said pole saw. I meant to say pole pruner or pole clip, as we typically call it. But I'm going to just basically pull on my string here, making sure I'm not standing under the branch. Again, this branch is wrapping through the center of the canopy, back through the middle of the tree. It just needs to go. So we're going to make a cut. And then a lot of times that branch will hold up in the tree, so you may need to reach up and grab it. Again, make sure you're not standing under it, and you can manage the size of the branch that's coming out. And basically just pull it directly from the tree. So one other thing that we often run into, especially if you're in more of a city setting, if you live in the city and you have a lot of power lines around you, make sure that, because crepe myrtles get tall, make sure that there are no power lines running through these trees, and that even includes the service line that may run from the pole to your house, because sticking a pole up in a tree or being, God forbid, don't get on a ladder, but being on a ladder and making cuts around a live wire like that is not a good thing. So just make sure that there are no wires running through your crepe myrtles. They really get hidden in there. We've run into them, and it kind of surprises you when you do. So we have another branch here. We're going to make a cut with a pole saw, and again, this is the pole saw. It has a sharp blade on the end of it, so be very careful with that. Now in this tree too, here is a branch that we feel would be better cut with a pole saw because it's a little large to be cutting with our pole clip. So when we make a cut on the interior of the tree or the exterior of the tree with a saw, whether it be a pole saw or a hand saw, you always want to make an undercut away from where your final cut will be. The reason we do that with crepe myrtles and other trees is we don't want the branch to tear. And what I mean by that, if you make your first cut at this point right here, it's a good chance as you're cutting through, the weight of that branch will cause it to tear and take off, basically just strip the bark off here, and that's not a good thing. So this is not a big branch. We probably could have cut it with one cut, but just as an example, you want to make the cut number one, the undercut, the cut number two. You've taken all of the weight off of that branch. You remove that, and then you can come back with your final cut. And you want to make that cut not flush, so not all the way up against the trunk of the tree, but more out and basically just beyond what we call the branch bark, or the branch collar, I should say. So we're going to make that cut. You end up with a very clean cut here that will callus over or will form new wood over top of that wound. Trees don't heal themselves, they seal. They form new wood over top of old wood, that donut look that you see when the branch begins to callus over. So that's a proper pruning cut, and that's the best method for using either a hand saw or a pole saw when you're cutting a larger branch. Okay, and during the pruning session today, one thing that we thought would be valuable to talk about is in the wintertime, you can actually look for either living or residual pest issues on your plant material. This is a dwarf Alberta spruce, a very common plant, again in the Central Virginia area. It is a spider mite magnet, so if there are spider mites in the area, typically they're going to come to this plant. And it is a little bit off color, a little bit chlorotic or yellow. Not as green as it should be, so it gives me the indication that there are some mites. There's some paper tests that you can do, or you can send a sample in to local extension or Virginia Tech. But point being, as you're pruning and you're looking around, look for insects. A lot of times you'll see residual scale. There are many different types of scale, but that's an insect that you can see on the bare stems of the plant when the leaves are gone that you might not recognize during the summer until something actually starts to really look bad. So as you're looking around, look for the problematic pests that you may have issue with in the summer that are much more visible this time of year. We were pruning yesterday and we actually saw a praying mantis egg sac, which was really cool. So we know to leave that alone. But again, take a look while you're out there pruning. You might see something that will surprise you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope some of the information we have shared with you will be beneficial for you in your own landscape and yards. One thing do keep in mind, after using your pruning tools, keep them in good operational order by oiling them, especially your hand pruners. Just a little WD-40 will help keep them lubed up. You'll keep them in good operational order and making sure that your blades are replaced when they start to get dull, or you should get them sharpened, one or the other. But appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you can get out there and have fun pruning.
Yeah, it's a lot to pruning. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone, and hope next time that we do it, it'll be in person and maybe out in the field. Pick a warm day in the winter and get out and do it. We do it every day, so the cold, it affects you, but it's not that bad. But get out when you can enjoy it. Don't get out at the last minute because you feel like you have to. So anything that we can help with in the future, we'd love to. And again, we really appreciate the opportunity to help out today.
Happy pruning.